Good day to you. Recognize this room? Yeah, those of you who are in the Monroe building, you know that this is the conference room, right? And there's a TV at the end there, which some people use to project computer type stuff, though that's not necessary anymore because we have a brand new projector in there, which students can use to project onto that whiteboard over there. Anyway, the TV's sitting there right now, and what use is of it? What use is it really? I mean, it has no cable, has no satellite. And so actually what I've just done is I purchased a Roku stick, ROKU stick for the department, and students are going to be able to use that TV too. It'll get Netflix and a bunch of other streaming services, as well as people with private accounts can get to other services on their own, such as Showtime, etc. Oh, and behind me over here are several materials related to the Department of Communication, several materials related to our bachelor's and soon-to-be master's, and our concentrations, etc. Yeah, walking around through my office here, a little bit cluttered right now. There is on the desk over here a tiny little thing which will look foreign to many of you. It's a clock radio. Yeah, clock radio. They used to be all about. You used to hear them when you go over people's houses, playing in their bedrooms, playing in family rooms, etc. Nowadays, when you hear audio, it's mostly by your own choices, or in places like I was yesterday getting my hair cut. And they had a kind of prescription, I would call it 70s rock service. It was just playing 70s rock, just like they do over at ShopRite when you go through there. So what I'm doing to start this video, in essence, is to introduce the idea of accessibility of media. Accessibility of media, this chapter that we're now taking on, the chapter that talks about those finer branches that actually deliver the leaves to passersby, the audiences being the passersby, the leaves being the content, haven't gotten to that yet. The smaller branches of accessibility deliver media to people. And some media are delivered very easily and you have easy access to them. Like when you go to a gas station, you're pumping your car and you hear a radio. You don't have to do anything. It's there for you. You bump into it, right? Others you have to pay for. Like if you want to watch a boxing match on pay-per-view, or if you want to watch a film, you pay for it. Still others have ways of paying for it that we've already talked about in this class that make it even more difficult to get to the product. Like you have to subscribe for a year, for example, like you do to some magazines. And so really what we're entering into now when we talk about accessibility is branching off, if you will, the other elements that we've recently talked about, including financing, to talk about the accessibility of media in the 8 countries in this book, especially given what we know about their cultural characteristics, about their financing, about their regulations, about their philosophies, etc. And so we're talking about how can you get to the media that are around you? Do you have to go out of your way? Do you have to pay for it? Do you have to be a certain age? Do you have to meet other requirements, have a membership, et cetera, et cetera? And let's get some terms out of the way. This is a very dry chapter, admittedly, very detailed, very long, but the nature of the beast is that there's a lot of details in accessibility. And so one detail is making sure we know the difference between broadsheets and dailies, broadsheets and tabloids, broadsheets and tabloids. Tabloids, I introduced in an earlier class. I would return to showing you one of the red tops that exist in Britain. This one is the most popular newspaper, not just tabloid, but newspaper in all of Britain, The Sun. And it's known for having its, quote, page 3 girl, topless girl in a newspaper that is read by even grandmothers in England. It's so popular. That is a tabloid. And the red top is very typical of several tabloids that are sold in Britain, like the Daily Mirror, for example. There are lots of tabloids, red tops in Britain that have this style of journalism. We'll come back and talk about that with news. But there's a difference between a tabloid, that shape of a newspaper, which looks like a tablet, right, and a broadsheet, which you all know from your local newspaper delivered to your doorstep, or the USA Today, or the Pocono Record, if you get that, or even the Stroud Courier. You know, it really is more of a sedentary way of reading a newspaper that's required for the broadsheet, because you sit down, it opens up so big, right? And some people fold it, and you got to have room to struggle with it and get it to where you want, looking at box scores, etc., an ad, a coupon. It's a big, unwieldy thing to work with in some ways versus the tabloid, which you can take on a train, which you can read in an elevator. which you can fold up and throw into even a pocketbook real quick, a handbag, I should say. So the tabloid is a much more mobile newspaper, but also because of the shape of it, it's better inclined towards vertical objects like people. That's why you have a lot of people in tabloids, because the aspect ratio, so to speak, the vertical dimension of it is more suited towards people. So make sure that we know the difference between broadsheets and tabloids. Also, there are some differences in the broadcasting world, especially between the US and Europe, which we want to make clear about. In the US, we talk about TV stations because we're such a big country. We have a TV station in Philadelphia, we have a TV station in Scranton, Wilkes-Barre. In smaller countries where the reach of the broadcast signal can actually include the whole country, is within range of the terrestrial broadcast signal, those countries often have channels, and often those countries have national channels. That means it's a public service, just like electricity. You can get that channel wherever you are in the country, and it's sometimes needed more than others, like a huge storm like we just had. What would have been like to have had a national channel covering that? There would be a lot more interaction between us and the West Coast and family and down south, etc., if we had a national channel that was dedicated to that. So it's a little bit more difficult to think of because we don't have necessarily that. We have channels here, but channels can carry any TV station. In other countries, it's part of the branding. All right, and I mentioned a term there, terrestrial. Just want to make sure we know what that means. That's over the ground. So it's broadcasting. That's what terrestrial delivery of content is radio over the airways. You got to have an antenna to pick it up. Not talking about internet, not talking about podcasting, any of that stuff. It's over the airways. All right, so now let's go on to the countries. Let's highlight what makes them really different when it comes to accessibility, starting with France. France, newspaper-wise, is very unique in some ways because the newspapers, as we will find out, are so highbrow and require so much cerebral thinking to get through them and to look up words and to really struggle with ideas that they have a very low penetration. You don't find the average person reading newspapers. They're dull to the average person. And so newspaper penetration, so to speak, the accessibility of newspapers is very low, as we will find out. At only 33% of the population are newspapers getting to on a regular basis. And part of the reason for that is because France has big magazine readership. Just as an aside, more of the content that you'd normally see in tabloid newspapers is actually delivered by magazines in France. They have a preference for that format, magazines. I want to also let you know that of the big national newspapers, that one of them is actually a communist newspaper. I got it right here. Well, I thought I had it. Sorry about the delay, but I don't have it. Anyway, it's a newspaper that's called L'Humanité, the human, or the humanity. And it's a communist newspaper delivered right there in France. How unusual is that? We have such an opposition to anything, even mentioning the word communism, that we don't even allow the ideas to be circulated, by choice. Whereas in France, one of the 5 national newspapers is communist. Not a very big readership, but it's there. France also has a right-wing newspaper, so to speak, for military. It's considered to be for speaking very much to France's military tradition. And then it has a very well-known sort of moderate left of center newspaper called Le Monde, The World. So France has very big differences when it comes to newspapers. However, these newspapers are not read by most people. France has an institution where newspapers are distributed. It's kind of cool. It's called a tabac. You have a picture of it in your book. It's a combination of lottery ticket store, tobacco store, goods and sundries type store. But also in France, you have little bars in there and little round tables and people sitting there sipping creme de menthe or a glass of wine or beer. And in this shop, newspapers are sold. People still come down to the newspapers who are regular readers, and that's how they get their newspapers, because they interact, they read, they talk, they discuss issues. On the radio side, France has a lot of government-funded radio stations. I say government-funded, it's really the license fee. The government's not giving it to the station. The government allows for the fees to be collected by an independent agency, and then they're distributed. So you end up with all these France radio networks. You got France Bleu, French Bleu, France Culture, France Info, France Inter, which is pop music, and then you've got France Musique, which is classical music. So you've got regional radio with French Blue. You've got cultural music, which is traditional French music, drama, discussion. You got news and information. You got pop music, and you got classical. These are all guaranteed by the government to make sure that the population has access to these 5 different kinds of content areas. And the France Inter is interesting, is it not? It's pop music. It's like saying the government actually has a role in influencing young people's top 40 music tastes, because that's what pop music is. But we totally hand that over to the commercial sector here in the US. TV stations, similar story there. You got 5 national TV channels, 5 national TV channels. France 2 or France 2 is general interest with cultural emphasis. France 3 is general interest with cultural and regional emphasis, France 3. France 5 is shared with another TV organization, I should say, named Arte. Completely different name, not a name of a channel, Arte. It's a German company. The French and the Germans share this channel, and it's based on art and artistic emphasis. And I think that's interesting given the history between France and Germany, and it's probably part of the healing process, truth be told, for these 2 countries to share a national French TV channel. And there's lots of commercial TV channels in France as well. Commercialism is very much part of the French media landscape. We know the government even participates in commercialism itself. I'm going to skip the internet penetration because the figures are old, and we'll move on to Sweden. Sweden, newspapers-wise, has the highest penetration out of any of them. Newspapers reaching 88% of adults. That's 50% more than France. Wow, 88% of adults on a daily basis. And there are the newspapers in Sweden are divided into the serious newspapers, also known as the morning newspapers. Serious newspapers, synonymous with the morning newspapers. There's big ones out of Stockholm. And then they also have what are known as the afternoon papers, which is the tabloids. So the tabloids, with the more scandalous news coverage of crime, corruption, wrongdoing, etc., they come out in the afternoon. It's an interesting psychology. Serious in the morning, scandalous in the afternoon. I think it's very interesting in Sweden. Radio-wise, similar theme to France. You have a lot of public service radio channels and TV channels. So in Sweden, they're not named Sweden 1, Sweden 2, like France's channels are named. They're named P for whatever reason. That P is a Swedish word. It probably means channel, truth be told. So P1 is talk. P2 is music, which includes classical and folk music. P3 is the young music or pop music channel. P4 is national adult, which includes news, pop, entertainment, sports, current affairs. See how when you get older, when you become an adult, you like more of a smattering of content. And then there are also 3 local channels, including one of them. The P4 is local adult, so wherever you live, it's going to be programmed in just by that particular municipality or region. P5 is Radio Stockholm, the capital, modern music just out of capital. Imagine if we had a New York channel or Channel New York, music just coming out of New York or Washington, D.C. So that's what that is, Radio Stockholm. And then P6 is multicultural channel broadcast in 17 languages. And then they also have a Finnish channel, which is P7, broadcasting just in the Finnish language because there's so much interchange between Sweden and Finland. They have different languages, similar cultures, different languages. They cater to that audience. Television-wise, as we mentioned in another chapter, in another instructor video on that chapter, there's only 3 national TV channels, 2 of which are public, no commercials, period. And the other one is a commercial TV channel, and as we studied also in another chapters, it has the smallest amount of commercial minutage that's allowed out of any of the channels, only 5 to 6 minutes per hour of minutage. All right, moving on now to the UK, our final European country. Similar themes here. Newspapers penetrating high, not as high as Sweden. 50% of adults reading newspapers. I can tell you, I loved to read newspapers in Britain. They're so interesting. The Sun, The Guardian, The Observer. The writing is so crisp. There's so many double meanings involved. There's a lot of humor and irony. And actually, that led me to my own style of writing in my own book called Rounding Some Corners, which I just signed with a publisher named Fountainhead Press, and I'm working on that right now. So some of these ideas are fresh in my head about British journalism and what makes it different, and we'll try to highlight some of those differences when we get to the content chapter. Britain has 10 national dailies. 10 national news, we have one, USA Today. Oh, sure, you can find the New York Times in San Diego or Anchorage, Alaska, I think, but it's not really a national newspaper, it's still New York based. USA Today is the only national newspaper in Britain, smaller country, right? You've got 10, 5 of which are tabloids like The Sun. The other 5 are broadsheets. And each one of them has their own personality, as we will discuss when we get to news a little bit later. So Britain's got a big reach of nationals. Over on the radio side, there's 8 terrestrial national channels. 8. So you've got 5 BBC channels, the British Broadcasting Corporation. Like you got a classic, you got BBC 1, BBC 2, BBC 3, 4, 5. And they carry classic rock. There's a pop one, there's a news one, there's a sports one. So we're seeing, again, government saying, we want to have a role in helping young people to decide what kinds of music tastes they want to have. Don't just leave it to the commercial sector, which might have other interests of selling stuff, right? We want to be involved. Interesting competing philosophies when you think about it. TV-wise, there's 5 national TV channels in Britain. 3 of them are BBC channels. And again, similar patterns to the French. One's general interest, the other's more cultural. All right, I'd like to move on to the U.S. now. In the U.S., we have daily penetration of newspapers at 55% of adults, so that's actually higher than the U.K. A lot of that is because men, quite frankly, enjoy reading box scores. So if newspapers are sold, but also there's a high percentage of newspapers that are those big city newspapers that are sold to people that are looking for some, how should we say, escape in their life by reading about the problems and tragedies of other people. So that's also a big reason as well. But probably the biggest reason for such high newspaper circulation is because we still have in our cultural habit the idea of the local newspaper being delivered to the home by a subscription. It's really the only place you can read obituaries, you can find out about people who you know who are in the news, sometimes unfortunately for criminal reasons or reasons having to do with harm coming to them. But these are the things that we are interested in, as well as coupons, as well as new construction in the area, et cetera, et cetera. So local newspapers still have a big role in American society.